negro y todos me señalaron. Dijeron igualdad, pero esta vez me separaron. Dijeron mucho, pero no se olvidaron de callarse. Cuánto odio por mi piel sembraron. Dijeron historia y la tergiversaron. Dijeron guerra, muerte, odio y nos culparon. Enfermedades, epidemias nos contagiaron. Exterminación de mi fauna complace a tus mercados. Dijeron riqueza y todos se lo robaron. Oro, platino, diamante, a la fuerza se lo llevaron. Y la actualidad es tan triste que todo aquello que dijeron es lo mismo que hoy se dice más. ¿Quién dice, quién explota, quién se beneficia? El asesino, el mismo que da las noticias. Hay una cuenta fácil que siempre me da las grandes riquezas, de dónde vienen y hasta dónde van.
Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao. Nati Dre es afroresistencia, cultura ancestral, afrodescendencia, solidaridad. Esa es la esencia, la diáspora africana eleva la conciencia, conciencia negra, universal, progresista y transcultural. Negros y mestizos revolucionando, pueblos caribeños y africanos en un solo bando. No más explotación, colonialismo interno, no más confusión, supremacía blanca en el Babilón. Soy rojo, negro y verde, afroliberación. Mientras más negro, más represión. Somos creadores, recupera tu visión. Mi visión es educar con amor, contra el silencio, vivo sin temor. Independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao, independiente como los Mao Mao, concluyente como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao,
como los Mao Mao. Somos resistentes como los Mao Mao.
Hello, hello, hello. Rise up, everybody.
Rise up, people. Rise up. Uhuru.
How you guys doing?
Uhuru. Y'all caught me in the middle of working, but I'm here.
Because you're always working, Ikemba. You're up so early, and the work is immediately what you start. We all got to get down on it like Ikemba. Just, we are literally working from the time we are up.
I was sending the email out, and it's just like, oh, I'm on the rise up.
Hey, look at that. Look at that. If I were on the receiving end of that early email, I hope you know that you would not get a response until at least 9:30 a.m. because that's what I'm not doing.
Hey,
working before 9:30 a.m.
Get it all out the way, so I don't have to think about it later.
Yeah, I feel you.
I mean, I listen. I want to be on point early morning, starting work, doing double work like Ikemba's doing. Right, he's doing the one work and he's doing this work. So yeah, I'm with it. Getting up, getting it. What is it? The early bird makes the worm or whatever. Like
the early bird gets the worm.
Yeah, early bird.
I decided I'm off worms these days. I'm off worms. I got to be early no more.
All right, no doubt. That's more worms for me.
And you have them because if we got to contribute to capitalism to get it, I'm a fast. I'm gonna fast.
No doubt.
Yeah, I've decided to be more intentional with my contributions to capitalism.
So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, what I'm doing is, like I said, work, working.
It's all about the kind of work.
In pockets, being intentional about the work that I'm doing. But no, seriously, I'm fortunate enough to be employed with an organization that recognizes that life comes before everything else. And what they do encourage, and again, this is just for my little pocket of the organization, what they encourage for us is to really prioritize the things that we have to do. And when it comes down to us, it's, family first, solidarity always. You make sure that you are taking care of yourself so that you can take care of your family. And if those things are taken care of, then yes, you can be, I hate to use this very capitalistic term, but you can be more productive at work. you can get more things done. And being intentional about it is really to not stress about the things that you cannot do anything about, but to really focus in on the things that you do have control over and where you do have influence. And I'm fortunate to be a part of an organization that encourages you to think about where it is that you really have the influence, where can we really move the needle, and that's where we're going to focus our effort instead of spinning our wheels on some things that we know is not going to change things for the people who we serve. So that makes a difference for me.
Yeah, I think being in whatever space you're in too, what you are doing in that space to disrupt colonial capitalism is important. And that could be on different levels too, because I'm not going to sit up here and tell everybody to do things that will risk your way of feeding your family, keeping a roof over your head. So there could be political education in those spaces, just having conversations with people about capitalism, about whatever space you're in, whoever you're working for, and how that relationship between the workers and the employer, what that relationship looks like and what it could look like through organization and through worker power. So you can have those type of conversations in those spaces. You can do things by utilizing the spaces I'm in. I try to utilize the space to bring organizers on campus into the campus community, to build with students, to develop relationships with them, organize, show them what organizing is about, creating that bridge between those who are out in the community doing community work and the students that are on campus. So creating a pathway for them in a sense. So whatever we're doing, those are some things that we can do, and how we use our resources as well.
Absolutely.
Those resources, are we funneling it back into the system that is not necessarily disrupting it? Or are we using it to further advance the cause for liberation? How much of our money is going to nation building, independent institutions? I know we got somebody later who's going to be talking about independent education institutions. So there's things that we could do. So being intentional, that's what we're talking about, being intentional when we're in those spaces. How are we disrupting it? How are we creating some sort of change?
Yeah, I think it's important for people to remember that we do have 24 hours in our day. And we should encourage people to use those 24 hours in the way that is most beneficial for them and their families. Although most people have standard quote unquote working hours, your working hours should be dictated by what makes sense for you and for your family, whether that is working in your capacity within your employment or even working in your outside organizing. It has to make sense for you and for your family. And that might look different for everybody. I know that it honestly does look different for me than most people because of the amount of things that I have on my plate. But I do love it that I have I think it's a luxury in this time. I have the luxury of working with an organization that encourages us to remember that those 24 hours are yours and that there are standard working hours. However, if you need to be flexible because of the things that life is doing, then you take that flexibility, but make the most of it in a way that makes sense for you.
Yeah, and I want to highlight and say thank you, Kiana, for really outlining what an org is supposed to do. It is supposed to work in reciprocity with the people. Now, I can say right now, this, Kiana, everybody probably on this live stream knows this. It's on camera. I worked for an organization that did not have the full understanding of what that meant, organization, and put me further in debt, which is why I'm in the situation that I'm in now. And so it's very, I would say, to add on to that, you got to watch if they're not putting or asking, hey, how are you doing? I'm not saying, where they're asking you, okay, you got your light bill paid, stuff like, I mean, that's important, stuff like that is important. But their first thing that they want to know is are you okay? Is your family okay? And so, now knowing the situation that I went through, I know that I have to look out for those signs of when they don't want you to really, meddle in personal. It's like, no, we're an organization. I should be able to ask you for some toothpaste. I should, anything from toothpaste to sugar, shit, all of that. I should be able to ask, that's the basic of understanding, that one, we live under capitalism. Not everybody has the same things. And that doesn't also, an organization shouldn't exploit individuals. So for me, give me 1 second, because Luna's whining. I don't know what's going on. Give me 1 second.
Luna's going lunar.
No problem. No, I mean, I think before we jump into our Black Power break, I also think it's important to prioritize your energy, like where you put it and how much of your energy goes in every place. And definitely that's something that I've been working on for the last couple of years, is just being very intentional and vigilant in terms of my energy, where I'm putting it. One of the things, that I always think about is okay, and even doing, the work that we do, when you have so much energy, and when you only have but so much energy, you have 24 hours in a day, yes, but the amount of energy that you are using within that time, it's very specific. And so you have to know where that energy is going, because you only have a certain amount of energy for that day and for the weeks and for the years. And so how much energy are you putting into your job? Because we know for us, we have jobs, and then we also do this, and then we also do community organizing, and then we also have to have our personal lives. And so each area takes energy, right? Even the energy that we give to ourselves. And so how much energy are you putting in toward your job, and how much energy are you putting in toward your family? How much energy are you putting in toward doing organizing work? And for me, I've gotten more, like Akimba was saying, using the spaces that he's in as a way to funnel people out of that institution and into our own community institutions and gatherings and organizations, so that going, if you're someplace where you're not able to, or it's not available for them, provide all of the information that we know that we have within the community and within our own organizations. How do you funnel those people? How do you use the space that you're in to funnel those people out into those areas that you're that they need to be in, so you feel like you're using your energy in a better way, instead of feeling like you have to use all your energy in this one place that you're in, and then you have to go to another place and use tons of energy there. And so just being cognizant of how much energy you put in different places. And I think all of us, it's a constant thing. It's a constant idea that we should be thinking about, how do we move ourselves away from even the kinds, the positions that we are in terms of work, so that we can feel more, have more freedom and stability. I think about organizations within the United States, bigger organizations, obviously, that have the money to say okay, well, I don't care what's going on. I don't need you, you don't control my whether I eat or not. Your opinion of me doesn't control whether or not I'm able to do this or do that. And so how do we put ourselves in positions where we're more self-sustaining, that we don't have to have our livelihoods connected to institutions and organizations that are not of us, by us, and really for us, even if they will be amenable, but ultimately amenable and actually empowering you to have the power to actually work toward your liberation and use most of your energy toward that, is not what we're in, unless we have our own institutions, like Akimba was talking about.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, if I could interject, I want to say, that's super important as well, because you highlighted something, that and I hate that, like, I'm using my own self as an example, but going to Dan Patrick School of Sports Broadcasting really taught me a lot about how this capitalist system wants you to talk about your own people, how they want you to talk about the African masses of people. And so building our own institutions, media, what we do here, what I do on my network, what you and Ikemba do on your network, Kiana, what you do for your radio show, that is creating alternative. And it's not even alternatives. It is a completely different, it is rooted in what it really should be: for the people, by the people, supported by the people, funded by the people. We are not here. We are here only if the people want us to be here. And it looks like the people want us to be here. So that's where I make that connection of, okay, I love sports, I love politics, I love talking about the truth, I love speaking up about the truth. How do I do that and at the same time put myself in that same category to never steer myself away from my radical revolutionary aesthetics? How do I not be a Stephen A. Smith? You get me? How do how do I not be an Akko? How do I not be a whoever out there that calls them a Don Lemon? How do I not be these individuals? Well, you be yourself, and you create your own narrative. You create a narrative that's rooted in truth, rooted in historical materialism. It's for the people. It's that's what that's where I'm at, which is why I'm fortunate enough to have a small group of people that have and know that they have wealth, know that they have enough to give around, and it not hurt their pockets, not put them in a position to worry or struggle. And it gives me the ability, and I still have to go out there and ask the people, but that's nothing that's new. And I don't like that notion of people like me that do work, or people like Natasha or Ikemba, or we say, hey, go support us, go support our Patreon. If you could support a news network that started 5 fucking months ago, that was started by 4 individuals that have verified accounts on Twitter that are above 20 to 25,000 followers, don't know how they got there, but if you could follow those individuals and funnel money to them, then you could work with indigenous media. You could work with indigenous African media. You could do that. That's not something that's impossible. And so, I'm very fortunate, not every time it's there, and I have to ask for a little extra help, but that just goes to show you what organization really looks like, is that I have created an organization of people that are here not just for myself, but are here for the cause as well. And I think that's important, for people to understand, is watch out for those signs when the organization wants you to be more focused on a party line rather than someone needing food in that organization. So that watch out for the signs of when you ask for something, and they deny you, or they say, oh, well, it's not in the budget, but yet they're flying people out to go to here, to this place and to that place, and they're not using, radical apps in order to get cheap flights and stuff like that. They're going straight to Delta. They're going straight to American Airlines.
Right.
Giving them one-way fucking tickets to meet their maker, essentially, in this climate, so
damn.
sorry.
Yeah.
Mask off, y'all. Mask off.
I had to go. Come on, man. That was unnecessary.
With that said, let's go into a Black Power break.
Well, hold on, if I may though, because that was
he's like, I'm gonna talk to his disrespectful ass.
No, I wanted to add on just really quick, because this conversation I feel like it's important, because there was some things brought out by everyone, and mutual aid is what we're really talking about and need to get back to. There's some organizations out there. I think we may have had this conversation, Isaac, but it's not like prevalent. It's not what we seen our communities doing during the antebellum period, like right before chattel slavery came to an end. Man, we had hundreds of mutual aid societies across the country that was working together to address the needs of the people, because they understood that we are marginalized people. Not I, but we are marginalized people. We are being oppressed. We are being exploited. And there's certain resources we don't have access to that we don't have. And so in order to overcome these contradictions, we have to work together. And these were institutions that were controlled by Black folks, that was, funded by whoever, but Black folks was funding it. There may have been some philanthropic, white folks putting, helping out with some of these mutual aid societies, but these were free African, associations. You had the African Free Society, the African Unions, Free African Union Society, all of these different organizations. But I think that's something we need to learn from, and let's get back to that. So to your point, Isaac, even with the media, that's something that even as media, everyone here is a part of a media platform outside of Black Power media. But we have to go into the word intentional. We have to be intentional in how we even support each other. We do it, but it's not like an organized thing. It's like, hold on, I'm doing this podcast. Let me shout out, some of my folks. But let's be more intentional. Let's say, okay, one podcast at a month. We all support Indigenous Nightmare, right? And say on our platforms, hey, we doing a fundraiser for Indigenous Nightmare to keep that going. And then we do one for We Charge Colonialism. We do for Vital Hoops. And we get that's a way that we can support each other, right? And there's some other, ideas we can come up with to see how we can create this network and who else we can bring into this network, because how many independent small networks or large networks that are doing it, if we was to create that, then that's a way we can sustain ourselves. Last point too is just another thing, going towards just things that we can do to disrupt capitalism, mutual aid, just creating a system among ourselves. Because you brought up the sugar, the butter, borrowing from our neighbors. Before I started teaching back in New York, I was doing a free store. Well, it was like a free / barter store out in the community. And so people from the community could come, and if they see something on the table they want, they could take. I encourage people to put something on the table as well. But if you don't have anything to exchange, here you go. But it was like excess that I had. It could be books. It could be a charger. I got 10 chargers. I'm not using these chargers. All right, let me go out here and put it on the table. You don't have to buy a charger, right? Mm-hmm. The objective too, that I didn't get to, right? But the objective was for not me to just have a table, but the community to come out. Let's have a table, a strip, and everybody's out there just bartering and trading. And we don't have to necessarily spend money because we have it right here in the community already. And so that's something that could also be done in this age of this digital age, where we can do this also online, but we could do it in the community where we are. So, those are just some examples of
I gotta send you, Ikemba. I wrote out it's like a pamphlet. It's about 40 pages, and it literally highlights how we can start combating the water companies, combating the electric companies, combating the supermarket industry by simply going to your fridge and seeing what your neighbor, and this is like people said in most cases, and I put it in the pamphlet, you get a little nosy when you do this, but it's to build upon a more radical and more communal like approach to making sure that everybody has what's needed. So say for instance, it also combats HOAs. So we should be growing stuff in our front yards. We should be growing stuff in our backyards. People think the supermarkets have been around since time immemorial. They have not. it was not created until they had a surplus of meat that they didn't know how to get rid of. And so what did they do? They created a meat industry. And so they bought out all the butchers. They bought out all these farms and the cattle and whatnot. And they started again. They made an industry. So when they come up, when they're met with a problem, they come up with another problem that they see as a solution to that problem. The arrogance in it, the fallacy. But this pamphlet just highlights exactly what you talk about, where it's like, if I got 10 if I got 20 carrots and I know I'm only going to use 10 of them, but I know that my neighbor across the street loves carrots and he got some onions or something that he's growing in his front yard, we could barter right then and there. 10 for 10, 6 for 12, whatever you want to call it. It's a bartering system that completely alleviates the US dollar. It alleviates at the same time, too, when you start reverting water to gray water and you start doing all of these things to really fortify and make your homestead what it should be, working in reciprocity with the land, with the people, and with the community. We start to exile all of these things like water companies, electric companies, gas companies, all of that, because we've reverted our ways of thinking into, okay, how about we just not pay the system? I don't think anybody's ever thought of that. Like, what if we all just stop paying the system?
Man.
You know, they would do one of two things. The system would crumble, and they would inflict martial law. They would force us. We would be going to jail.
Oh yeah, we
didn't use our credit cards. So it's just a matter of trying. But I know we have to go to a break for Black Power. Are we doing the Amos one first, or are we doing the Dr. King first? Just to be clear.
Let's go with Doc, because I know we're gonna have a guest in a second.
Well, which Doc? Because there's Dr. Amos. There's Dr. King.
The one from Mississippi, Dr. Amos.
Dr. Amos. Okay. All right.
All right. So
we'll be back from this break for Black Power. Natasha went miss. Oh, there she is.
I'm here. I'll bring us in.
A couple of days ago, and it just so happened that I'm serious about this. When I approached the desk, there was a developmental psychology book on that desk, and I looked through that book, and there was nothing on the black child, and I'm talking about at a black institution. Why is that? Why does that exist?
For a number of reasons. One of the reasons, I think, and an overall reason, is that these psychologies, you see, just by the title of them, are called developmental psychology. And that deceives many people into thinking then that this is a psychology that has equal applicability across board. And unfortunately, many black schools and black scholars operate under this illusion. One of the things that we don't, as black people, I think we are not conscious enough of, is how white disciplines, not only psychology, but sociology, all are part and parcel, really a part of the process of maintaining the subjugation of black people. And I don't think we are aware to the degree that we should be, that when we're engaged in standard American education, we are actually engaged in what are called European studies or white studies. We have a lot of people who went off, you know, in the 60s, and we demanded black studies as if we were demanding something ethnic, as if what had been offered in America and what's being offered in American universities is non-ethnic and objective and across the board. And therefore, the European then doesn't call his courses the psychology of the white child, or the sociology from the European perspective, or white economics, but this is exactly what it is. And therefore you have in many black schools then this idea that simply because it is not overtly labeled white or European, that it is not therefore white or European in origin. And to a great extent, these psychologies are exactly what they should be, in a sense. They are there to maintain the position of Europeans as such. The European, in a sense, protects his own interest by not really talking about the black child in any truthful light and presenting the black child in a different sort of light. the ultimate outcome of studies, even in black schools, ultimately is to maintain the European in a superior position as such.
Oh, that was such a quick that was a much quicker break for Black Power than I thought. I was like, oh, the video's over.
Keep it short and sweet.
I'm over here
short and simple.
You know, I'm over here taking notes, like, yeah, he's dropping something. And then I'm like, it's over.
Yeah.
You know, he was preaching. Sorry, go ahead.
Hold on, let me make this right. I just realized this.
That's right now.
Yeah, that's
right. Now it's right.
Brothers at the look at this matriarchy going on right now.
What they call that? That's I ain't even gonna say it, man.
You can get us canceled. You better stop.
I'll put one of we'll switch it up every once in a while. It's a little balance for us. I'm
scared, man. I'm scared that
Why you gotta put? I don't know.
2025, man. This new millennium, black women. I'm not messing with you. I'm not getting canceled. I'm not being labeled, misogynist.
The ones you gotta watch out for in the African diaspora, the ones that wear the blue bands over here, still sad and upset that little Miss Kamala didn't win.
I'm like, what is it?
My goodness, bro. Don't get me started on that again. Let's move away from that.
So what y'all think about what any comments on what Amos Wilson was saying in that clip?
It correlates with what Imam Jamil Al-Amin, because I feel like if we're going to be on live, we got to talk about political prisoners, the same ones that have risked their lives to continue the struggle for us mentally, physically, and then some. When he talks about politics and education and politics in education, we have to understand that there has never been a time where they have taught us the truth in these educational systems. Again, history, his story, spoken by the victor. There's many other things I could say. White studies, as it was described by Amos Wilson, is it's white European studies. Is it what we're learning? We're learning the conquest that got to where the current conquest is today. And that's really what it is they're keeping you up to date with basically saying, look, white men have been feudal this whole entire time, and we're going to try and find some way to justify it by manipulating the history books, by manipulating the academic departments into mildly talking about certain things. I remember I got in trouble in high school because I called out my teacher for trying to say that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam and Buddhism were all connected religions. And she tried to double down on it. And I got in-house suspension a couple of times because I wrote I have a dream speech of my own. And in the beginning of that, I said, I have a dream that, African boys and girls will be able to be taught African world studies by an African teacher and not a person who thinks that 1.5% Cherokee makes her indigenous. I was talking about my teacher. I got in-house suspension for that.
Isaac Martin Luther King.
How old were you?
I was about 16. I was about 15 or 16 years old when I said that. And I got in-house suspension. I also got in-house suspension for one of my teachers, me pointing out that there was a paragraph on the Black Panther Party, and I refused to learn about a whole entire 3 chapters of the Ku Klux Klan that they wanted to teach. And she got mad. And she got mad when I told her, I said, well, coming from you, this makes a whole lot of sense. And she said, why? I said, your last name is Wilhelm. I said, Wilhelm, was the Kaiser of Germany. I said, and had a feudal war with his cousins. I said, in the First War. So again, I
wish I was in your class, man. I'd have been. But at my age at that time, I'd have been rolling.
They have consistently taught us that communism's bad, capitalism's good. Exploitations of the indigenous population is justified. The exploitation of the Jewish population is bad. So you see how, like, you know, they don't want you to learn about the 15 million, you know, Congolese that were subjugated to exploitation and genocide so that Belgium could reap the rewards and get itself out of bankruptcy, but they want you to learn about what happened in Nazi Germany and not make the connections to and not make those connections to what's happening to the Palestinians now, and how that's the same exact situation and how they're justifying it by the means of religion, as they always do, manifest destiny. So again, it just teaches you that, you know, they don't teach you anything. And I think I wrote down on here, you know, we're taught nothing but white, you know, white studies in an imperialist mode, and we will never learn true, or at least, you know, people before us, the children, won't actually know true African history until we, you know, we debuckle the American system. So I'll get off
I'm with you on that note. I'm with you on that note. I'll quickly, I just want to add to something that you said. It made me think of recently, because I'm in teacher mode right now, and I have a course on the Black Civil Rights Movement.
I was about to say, let me find out you teaching a course you know you shouldn't be teaching.
Nah, but this is one of the points that I was making in regards to what we learn and what they want us to know and things that they don't want us to know, right? And I was talking about Nat Turner, and though like Nat Turner is someone that, of course, like they don't want to uphold as a hero. That's our hero. But at the same time, we know about Nat Turner. We know about that rebellion. But why we don't know about Madison, Washington, which was around the same time, around 1841, or even Amistad. We really didn't learn about the Amistad, but Madison, Washington was someone who was enslaved and escaped slavery, went back into enemy territory, like he went to Canada, went back into the South to free his wife who was enslaved, and ended up being enslaved again, and was about to be traded, was put on a slave ship to go to New Orleans, and the slaves committed a mutiny, killed the slave trader, and sailed to Barbados, and those people were free, never went back into slavery, except 5, which I found interesting. 5 chose to go back into slavery, but I don't want to digress. We're going to say that conversation for another segment of Black Power. But why we don't know about Madison, Washington? Because he was successful, and Nat Turner, you know, was someone who led a rebellion, but was killed and made an example, and the other people who rebelled. So there's certain things they want us to know that, hey, if we resist, it's not going to be successful. Because if we have another narrative, and Robert F. Williams talked about this, rest in power, that we learn about George Washington's and all of them who were successful and died at an old age. And when it comes to our movements, our people die at a young age when they resist the system. So, you know, I think that's important. But I just want to add that on. I know that kind of is taken away from.
No, it's not. It actually gets into what I want to talk about. Is that, you know, okay. People, you know, you brought up Nat Turner. You know, people don't know how Nat Turner died. People don't know that there's a book, literally. It's called The Decadent Negro, and it goes over the nasty, grotesque cannibalism that settler colonialism was fully in reciprocity with. They turned Nat Turner's bones into lamps, into chairs. They fried him. They ate him. They made him into grease. Again, called it Nat's good stuff or some shit, like some nasty stuff like that. And
was sick.
You know, I mean, we know that they were also. I mean, even before Nat Turner, like this was a practice that they did.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Let me stop back. I'm surprised.
With jarring, you know.
Let me say like.
With making them into cigars, like I mean,
yeah.
The when they were, you know, when we know at lynchings, that the body parts would be souvenirs. So when you see those lynching pictures, you see all those people, they'll be fighting over, you know, who gets to take which body part home as a souvenir. Like, we know that they were doing these sickening practices, and they extended it, right?
They continue to do it today, and have, you know, in the earliest account that we have of you know, stealing of members of bodies is weak, you know, and shout out to Mike Africa Jr. You know, from the move movement, is that there are body parts that are missing, whole torsos that were, you know, dismembered and are held by, you know, museums, which is grotesque and disgusting. I'm going to pass this over to Natasha, though, because I see that we got our guest here, so we can start this next conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it'll be an extension of the conversation that we're having, and after our conversation, we can get into some news stories. But along with that Amos Wilson clip, when he was talking about, you know, their own interests, how, you know, Europeans, what they're doing is that they're protecting their own interests. And so when we talk about education, when we talk about what we're not learning, what we are learning, and when we talk about, like, the stuff we were talking about at the beginning of the show in terms of mutual aid, like, all of these things are important in terms of us thinking about how do we ultimately position ourselves to really win. And so one of the things when we're talking about mutual aid, we also should be looking at mutual aid when it comes to education. And so that's one of the things that our guest today is working on. And so I'm going to bring him to the show and have him introduce himself. Welcome, Nemo, to the show. Brother Nemo, you can introduce yourself to the people for those that don't know you before we get into our conversation for today.
Hey, peace, everybody. Hey, peace, Dr. Kemba, Natasha, Isaac, and Kiana, sisters. How y'all doing, brothers? Peace to the listening audience. My name is Nahimael Ibrahim Sims, known in the community as simply Brother Nemo. And I'm an educator in Brooklyn. I just left Clara Barton. I've been teaching since I was 18. I'm 25, so that's 7 years. And I do a bit of journalism here and there. So happy to be on to talk with you guys today. It should be a good discussion.
So tell us, so I know that one of the things that we were talking about before you got on was Amos Wilson was talking about education and the kind of education that we receive, and how the type of education that we receive is, you know, the standard white education, not an education that actually is fulfilling for Black people. And most of the things that are done in terms of the disciplines that even white people control, you know, they're white disciplines. They're not unbiased, general, universal disciplines in the ways that they would like to have us think. And I know one of the things that you've been doing within the community and have been working to build up is around African-centered education. So talk to the people about what African-centered education is, and then the initiative that has been growing around specifically independent African centered institutions and African-centered education.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with what is African-centered education. And I think previous two generations did a lot of work around defining and framing what that is. And as I understand it, African-centered education is a womb to the tomb process, right? So this is not something that happens from K through 12 or you're finished with at, in college once you get a degree, right? This is a womb to the tomb process that prepares African people to deal with their surroundings using African modalities of thought, worldviews, methods of understanding, epistemological modes, and the outcome is to have African people prepared to deal with our environment, to have us be able to interact with our environment, to integrate the information that we get from interacting with our environment, and then adapt, right? And And that's just not what the public school system is providing. African-centered education is more than just learning an African language, although learning African languages is a very important part of the process, right? It's more than just wearing the dashiki or wearing the clothes, although that is an important part of the process, right? It's a wholesale process that aims to develop the human being, right, into a person that sees the world from an African point of view and has them prepared to deal with what needs to be done in the best interest of African people.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I know within that you've been working on an initiative, which is one of the reasons, right, that we're here talking, and you're a guest on the show today. So to talk more about this initiative that's going on within the community, particularly here in the Northeast region, around independent institutions. So tell us about the initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the struggle for interdependent African-centered educational institutions is a initiative that says we are having a problem sustaining what we're calling institutions, right? And we're having a problem defining institutions that serves our best interests. Case in point, a lot of the discussion today is about building institutions. We need to build institutions, right? That's a pertinent point, right? We need centers, we need businesses, we need hospitals, we need, these organisms people can use to develop that serves the best interest of African people. However, more important than saying we need African institutions is talking about how are we going to build these institutions? How are we going to construct them? How are we going to structure them so that they can last more than 5 or 10 or 15 years? And the critical point of analysis that I'm trying to offer and that I'm opening, essentially I'm opening up to critique, is that the way in which we are building our institutions does not serve that purpose. It does not serve the idea that this thing is going to last 50 and 60 years, right? Because an institution essentially is not just an organization that you build, right? An institution is an organization that you build that can outlive the people that founded it. And in order for the institution to outlive and prosper after the people who founded it have passed on, the institutions have to be built a certain kind of way. And this is what we're trying to figure out, right? What are these internal contradictions that are inhibiting our institutions from lasting a long time, right? What are the nuances around the power relationships, right? What are the nuances around coordination? What are the nuances around funding, right? That have our institutions not last a very long time. I was reading this essay called "Cultural Leadership and Cultural Democracy" that comes out of The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual by Harold Cruz, and I read this sentence that is just really pertinent. He says, "This new young generation must first clear the way to cultural revolution by a critical assault on the methods and ideology of the old guard Negro intellectual elite." And so a part of this effort is also to say that we young thinkers, we young activists in 2025 have to appreciate and build on top of the work that previous generations have done, but we also have to be critical. We also have to look and ask questions and not just blindly accept assumptions, theoretical frameworks, and say, our people, the reason, African people are not moving forward because African people are not a part of organizations, right? The organizations, right? We need to say, hey, maybe the organizations themselves need some organizing. Maybe the same social contradictions that are evident in the general population of African people are also evident in the organizations, the quote unquote institutions that we build. And this might be a reason as to why they are not lasting a long time. Right? Because we can't just talk, we have to, in 2025, we have to be talking sustainability. It's not just about build something to build something. The question has to be, if we build this thing, how long is it going to last? And so that's essentially the central question of the entire praxis. So yeah.
Yeah, I know that Brother Nemo has been out talking to different schools, organizations, places about us really taking a look at ourselves, taking a look at our within, looking in the mirror in a sense, right? As organizations and people who are part of organizations, and seeing, okay, how do we retool? And I think I've spoken to many different people across the United States, even outside of the United States, that have been organizing, and even within their organizations have been saying, okay, yeah, we need to reframe, retool, rethink. We need to look and see, because we know that, like, it's important for people to join organizations and it's important for us to build institutions. But we do know that over the past couple of years, especially when we think about the ways in which number one, we know we're being warred upon, right? And so that the things that we do are warred upon as well. And so how those institutions and organizations that we know that have been created in the past, how they were warred against, and what that has left in the wake, right? So when we think about colonialism and imperialism, like that war, and we know that colonialism, imperialism isn't over, right? So that it's continuous. And so what did the moves, the colonial imperialist moves that were made against, especially when we're thinking about right before, we're in a time, we have to think about the time that came, even if we're thinking about the time that came right before the time that we're currently in, we're in the aftermath of the war against, the Black studies. We're in the aftermath on the war against the Black Panthers. We're in the, in the BLA. We're in the aftermath of the war. And we were talking about a little bit before, maybe before we got on air, of, the assassinations, of how you don't get to, and I think Akimba mentioned it a little bit, that, those of us who are leaders, those of our leaders that we think about, they didn't get to, you could resist, but you didn't get to live too long after resisting. So we know that we're in that aftermath, and the way our organizations look and the way in which things are moving is part of that aftermath. And so what does that mean for us? And I think
absolutely. And this is why the discussion around political prisoners is so important, because we look at me as a 25-year-old, and you all who, my older comrades. We look at
I'm 2 years older than you, my guy.
Oh, 27. Okay. I know
I'm younger than you, bro. I'm younger than you, man. What you talking about, bro? What you talking about?
We look at the past, and I hate to say it, but a lot of what we're looking at, a lot of it is romanticism, and a lot of it is not a clear analysis of what actually took place. And our enemies, they take these people, the Imam Jamil Alameen's, the Sunjata Akolis, the Sekou Odingas, the Leonard Peltiers, the Eddie Ellis's, and they lock them up in prison so that they cannot tell us where they went wrong. They cannot tell us, no, don't do it like that. We tried that. Don't do it like that. That's not going to work. Or you're living in a different time period. You might want to do it a different way, or that theoretical assumption that we made, that was incorrect. Don't do it like that. And so to go back to the struggle for interdependent African-centered education, the cry in the 60s and 70s was for independence. We need independent institutions, right? And I think that made sense. But there's a problem with that that I'm asserting. I'm asserting that independence tells you who you want to be free from, whose control you want to be released from. It doesn't necessarily tell you whose you want to be dependent on, right? If you are trying to be independent of a system that is pervasive and has a huge amount of resources at its disposal, you better have some serious and quality relationships. You better have a sturdy infrastructure where you can share resources. And I'm not just talking about money, where you can train personnel, where you can swap tactics, right? And so we want to move the discussion from independence. We need to bypass independence, and we need to move towards interdependence, because you cannot remain independent without solid relationships with other people. And if you don't believe me, go ask the Jamaican Maroons. If you don't believe me, go ask Gangazumba and Palmares, who thought that they could just be independent of the system without fostering quality relationships with other groups of people, and they eventually were wiped out. And that's the same thing, crudely. That's akin to what happened with the independent African school movement in the 60s and 70s. We know what happened with the charter school movement when charter schools came along as a response to this growing movement to educate our own, right? The charter school movement comes along, and it practically, I don't want to say destroyed, because there are some organizations, I'm hesitant to use the word institution, because an institution is something that outlives the people who founded it. So I want to call them proto-institutions, right? There are some proto-institutions that are still around. You understand? But when the charter school movement came, it all but crippled this movement to educate African people by African people. And why is that such a critical discussion? Why is African people educating ourselves very critical? Because the same organizations, the same revolutionary organizations that we found need to be filled with quality and trained personnel. A lot of the people that join our movements are not trained from the time that they're children. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them, and this is not a bad thing, I'm just saying that this is an observation of our reality that I've observed. That a lot of the people that join these revolutionary organizations had an awakening in college, right? Came to some consciousness in college, or they were in the streets and they came to some consciousness in the streets, or they were on the liberal side and they recognized that liberal politics is not going to get it done. And so you know what I'm saying. But as a process where African children are groomed from the time that they are 0 and 1 and 2 and 3 to understand that not just the ideological tenets of what needs to be done, but the ability to innovate ideology, the ability to innovate theory, as well as the ability to take resources and skills and apply that in the best interest of African people. That is why independent African-centered education is very important. And when the charter school movement came along and crippled it, It was a continuation of the COINTELPRO program of the 60s and 70s. They said, we crushed you, and we're not going to allow you to rise again. We're going to crush you, and then we're going to crush your ability to produce the personnel to make operational the fancy ideological terms and jargon that you spit in these organizations. Because without the personnel, we're not going to be able to do any of that stuff. But we don't have disciplined personnel, you know. And so the end goal of this struggle, and it's really more, you know, this struggle is really more about the process than it is the end goal. But I know we're coming down to the last couple minutes, so I want to get to the end goal. The end goal of this struggle is to entreat institutional leadership to sit down at a discussion table and to figure out a framework for coordination and cooperation. And then to entreat the constituencies. So we don't just want to talk to the institutional leadership, right? We also want to talk to the general body of the organizations, because we know, regardless of what radical politics you espouse, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And if the general constituency of these proto institutions, of these organizations, do not feel empowered to hold their leadership accountable, then the leaders will do whatever they want to do. So you can entreat them to sit down at the table, and you can even, you know, some of them will come, some of them won't. And even the people who do come, who's to say that they'll follow through with this discussion, with this agreement? No, there needs to be a radical analysis of power relations and authority relations internal to radical African organizations, and have this be the foundation for a conversation around coordination and cooperation. Because if the power disparities within organizations are uneven, then we can talk this coordination and cooperation stuff all day long, and we can write fancy memorandum MOUs but what are we going to have? We're going to have Paul Morris all over again. We're going to have the Jamaican Maroons all over again. We're going to have African people in their silos, directed by leadership that they not only do they not exercise the power to hold accountable, they don't feel like they can hold them accountable. You understand what I'm saying? And we want to do this by this is what we're calling a mutual aid developmental agenda, right? We're not proposing that we have the answer to how organizations are going to cooperate or what the framework exactly is going to look like, right? We're not proposing that. We just want to have some folks sit down at a table, and we're doing this through amassing 5,000 signatures, right? If African people can sign a petition to protest local and state governments, we can sign a petition to protest our own leadership. And we want to legitimize this effort by doing the 5,000 signatures and also taking $10 from those 5,000 African people. And so when we go to these institutions that we know are struggling, I know because I've worked at a couple of them, right? We want to be able to say, and we also have some funds here, right? So we don't just want to come to the table with no resources. We want to say, you know, here's a Band-Aid, here's a little $10,000, here's a little $15,000, here's for whatever you need, but that's not the solution. That's a Band-Aid. These piecemeal fundraisers. Oh, $50,000 here, $20,000 here. That's a Band-Aid. The real cure is in the way in which the institutions are being built. How can you be a chairman of an institution for...
Nehemiah.
Yeah, I'll stop there.
Before you go deep into that, because I did want to respond, but I know Isaac had a question. So I'm sitting here in the queue just like, damn, I still got to wait for Isaac.
Sorry.
But I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And one of the things that I've highlighted, I've been taking notes here, is, you know, how you said, in order for us to combat the African, you know, to combat the American education system, we have to have our own African-centered education system that has to be completely, what I'm understanding, disavowed from the colonial system, meaning that it doesn't work in reciprocity with it. But one of the question being is would you say that there is a lack of anti-intellectualism and manipulation of vocabulary that is very prevalent? Because you bring up a valid point that I speak about myself is that, you know, we have to define an independent under an imperial mode of production. We have to define truthfully from an African perspective how vocabulary is being used. You know, we have right now the neo-colonial fascist imperialist system that uses the term woke, completely co-opting that term, co-opting terminology to then suit their need, to benefit their needs and continued modes of imperial production. Would you agree to that? Is it we have a lack of anti-intellectualism and a lack of people truly understanding the meaning of vocabulary and even understanding what that is and how that's a manipulation and a facet used by the imperial mode?
Yeah, I'll answer that question very quickly so we can get to Dr. Kemba. Two things. Interdependence doesn't mean isolation. A lot of our children are still in the public school system. And so if we're going to build a system, we have to build a system that can plug the holes of the public school system and provide a conveyor belt of getting these families out of that system and into our system. However, so that's kind of a form of cooperation or a form of interaction. The key thing is that if the proto institutions that we are building do not have are not built in a mode of organization that prioritizes cooperation, shared leadership, and equal power relations between leadership and general constituency, if we don't do that, then we will not be able to sustain the institutions that we're trying to build. We're just going to build something that's going to last 10 or 15 or 20 years, and it's going to be struggling, and we're going to be doing piecemeal fundraisers. We need to build a system that fosters interdependence so that we do not have to be dependent on the colonial system. In a small way to say, you have to be dependent on each other in order to be independent from, or sovereign, because independence and sovereignty are not the same thing, sovereign from the colonial system. And I do think that there is a anti-intellectual sentiment coming from our enemy system, but there's also an anti-intellectual sentiment coming from within the Black radical tradition today. Inside the movement, there's an anti-intellectual. You hear the sayings. I'm not about all that talking. I'm about that work, right? People are quick to quote Nkrumah, where Nkrumah said, "Thought without action is empty," but hesitant to quote Nkrumah and finish the axiom where he said, "Action without thought is blind." So we talking about how much work that we doing.
I think we're vacillating between two extremes and not bringing them into the middle. So, Kemba, you had your question?
Yeah, well, I agree with what you said, Natasha. I was thinking the same thing. You see, I've been in both of those spaces. People who are doing a lot of action, a lot of work, no theory behind it, and then you have people who that's all they do. is theorize. A few things, and you don't have to go deep into it if you don't want. Just a few thoughts. I think like the institution, when it comes to institution, I think we do have institutions. There may be contradictions, but there's definitely institutions within the community. Whether you're talking about the family itself, is an institution, or any organization that comes together that has rules, that has customs and laws that guide their work, and sort of create a tradition around that. Then you have institution. Now, I think you raise a great point, though, in regards to the longevity of many of these institutions. I guess I kind of want to hear some of those reasons. I think you touched on it, but what are like some of those things that we need to like really address to have these, like what are some of the fundamental issues? Because
Absolutely.
one thing I mean, I see, if I could do the second part to that too, like one thing I definitely see is we have to make sure that these institutions are servicing the community. The other thing, though, really quick, so you can address that, is I feel like the Maroons, though, your criticism of the Maroons, I have to push back on that, though, because I feel like if you look at the context, the limitations that they had to be able to create this interdependence, at least outside of those boundaries, because we're talking about colonies. And so the Maroons definitely created sort of interdependence among themselves. Maroon communities were working together. So you had that interdependence, but there was the limitations that they had because of embargoes. If we look at Haiti, but just the inability for them to be able to have that trade. So I just wanted to say that, though, in regards to the Maroons. But and with independence, if I may, 10 seconds, I think the independence is that struggle is to be independent and have the freedom, the liberty to be able to do as they please and create like these trades, the interdependence that you're talking about. So I don't know, maybe you're critiquing that conversation isn't being had enough. Maybe it's not, but that should be like the objective, to be able to create systems, international systems, be able to trade with African nations and other nations and have that interdependence. But we have to be independent to be able to do that and be able to make those decisions without having to go through another power, such as the colonial state.
Yeah, absolutely. To touch very quickly on your question around what are we pointing at concerning the fundamental contradictions around the way that these organizations or these proto institutions are built. I think fundamentally we have to look at power relations. What are the internal dynamics of how decisions are made and how decisions are enforced concerning the direction of these proto institutions, right? Who calls the shots, right? And who holds whoever is calling the shots accountable, right? As I understand it, in African political philosophy, the king, in theory, the king he had absolute power in theory, but we all know that if the king didn't do if what the king did was not in accordance with the will of the people, then the people felt emboldened to get him out of there, right? And that's in a centralized context. We have a centralized state, a monarchy or as such. We also know that within African political philosophy, there are significant tendencies for groups of people to be self-governing, to be decentralized, where power relations and authority models around authority are significantly decentralized, where the people in the village have a much more involved day-to-day involvement around decision making. We also know that family, as Dr. Kemba noted, was the primary, and in some cases is the primary institution in politics. In African political philosophy, the family is the primary political entity, the primary political unit. And so we have to look at power relations. We have to look at these institutions and say, hey, who is making decisions? And who is enforcing the decisions that are made? And two, we have to look past fancy words. We have to look past charisma. We have to look past who has the most theory, right? We have to go back and say, what is the character of the person in leadership? You know what I'm saying? And this goes back to the idea of training personnel from the time of them being little children. Not somebody wakes up one day, I call it accidental leadership, where somebody wakes up one day and,
and they decide that they want to be the leader, and therefore people, people follow after them in that kind of way. But I do know that Sister Kiana also had a question before we end this, since we're getting to the end of our talk here.
Yes, thank you so much, Nehemiah. Definitely appreciate you and all the work that you're doing. My question is related to home education, because I am a homeschooler. And one thing that I have found where I am in my locale is that many of us homeschool because we have turned to what we thought were independent Black institutions. And as you said, there is an issue with plenary authority. There is this thing about power over and not power with, where the decisions are not being made in a way that serve the best interest of all, but also it becomes unsustainable because of the fact that there are those who are just beginning to wake up to the detriment of standardized American education. And they're not fully into what it means to have an African-centered education and the benefit of that to their children. So some will go straight into homeschooling because they'll say, these schools are not for my children. My children are in harm's way. I want to make sure that they have an education. But many times they have turned to the African-centered or supposedly independent Black institutions, but they have been turned off in a way because there is a cliquish nature that forms among not only the educators that have founded the institutions, but those parents who see themselves as the seed parents. Like, we are the ones who helped this school get off the ground. We are the ones who have a tremendous say in how things go. And we are the ones who are going to dictate what this institution looks like going forward. And what will begin to happen is that many families will fall away and they turn to home education. But all of that is only relevant in the context of what the relationship is of the independent Black institution to those who do home education. Is there any room for collaboration wherein those who do home education can have a few classes here, a few classes there, while they are deciding if this independent Black institution is going to be the best fit for their children, and what resources even outside of that would the institution provide to the community? Because I feel like that's where the disconnect is, in that there are just not enough offerings from independent Black institutions to homeschoolers to make African-centered education of more importance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This question that you're raising around cliquishness, this question that you and I are raising around internal power relations, around how decisions are made and enforced, around who leadership, authority. This is not a new conversation. Ella Baker was pushing this discussion in the 50s and 60s when she was pushing against the charismatic leadership model of CORE and saying that we need a more participatory democratic model of making decisions. So I think it's up to the sector of the general population of African people that concerns itself with social change to look inward and to challenge itself and say that yes, we need to protest the state. Yes, we need to protest the state government, the local government, and the national government. And yes, we need to protest colonialism. And yes, we need to protest imperialism. But in a very important dynamic in all of those reactionary systems deals with internal, how African people deal with our own internally. We have to look at who is leading our institutions and the models that they are using to make decisions. This is not a new discussion, right? We can raise the same criticism of the Garvey movement, right? We can raise the same criticism of the 1950s and 1960s Nation of Islam. Not saying that these organizations have not done great work. We can raise the same criticism of the Black Panthers. We can raise the same criticism of the civil rights movement. Not casting aspersions at these great influential movements that did a lot of work for our people. But going back to Harold Cruz's point that I read earlier, that we as the new age revolutionaries and intellectuals have to look, at past tendencies and say, yes, we'll accept this, and no, we won't accept that. And we need to look at that a little bit closer. And we need to spend a bit more time, just a little bit more time, looking at our own movement. Because I do not agree with the idea that African people as a general population is not moving forward because there's a disconnect between the revolutionary organizations and the general population. That all we need to do is have more African people a part of these organizations. I do not agree with that. As a person who has been in multiple organizations, I'm saying that there's something wrong with the organizations themselves. There's something misorganized within the organizations themselves. And we need to look at that contradiction instead of, I want to say busy work, instead of constantly, the only attention that we give is to our external enemies. We need to look inward. And so this is kind of what this, and the same analysis that we're making towards this sector, right? This educational sector, right? We chose to look at the educational institutions because education is foundation to any society's ability to perpetuate itself, right? But as such, this same analysis can be applied to any other sector of the population.
And we give thanks for, this analysis that you brought forward in this initiative that you're doing in terms of, just bringing it to the community as a whole, in particular in the area of education, like you mentioned. But we know that, we can do self-analysis and critique in any situation. We know that with it, no matter what is happening, whether it's on the actual battlefield of physical war or in the, classroom battlefield of intellectual warfare, or, within the wider society and the battlefield of cultural warfare, that we have to always continue to look at ourselves and ask ourselves questions and refine things. And like you said, take along with us what is beneficial and throw away what is not beneficial for us in thinking about these things. And so we appreciate you for coming on and telling us about the initiative that you're doing around interdependent institutions and thinking about how African-centered education in particular and independent African-centered institutions in particular can be more interdependent in terms of the ways in which that you operate, but not just the way you operate, but also the way that you are created, right? How you start, what your vision is, how you continue to operate with that vision and knowing that vision, and how do we also use that same critique in all areas in which that we're organizing as a people. We know we're organizing on the education front, we're organizing on the cultural front, we're organizing on the physical front as well. And so how do we take those lessons and not betray our mission in our times as you know.
And just to close out, if you are in Brooklyn, and this Saturday at 2 p.m. at Mega Everett's, if you're in New York City, if you're in the tri-state area, this Saturday, Mega Everett's, 2 p.m., myself and Dr. Kemba. Dr. Kemba will be hosting me at Mega Everett's College, where I'll be giving a 2-hour, 1 hour and 15-minute lecture, trying to go a little bit deeper into the nuances of what we're trying to put forward and propose. And then we'll do a 45-minute question and answer, and like a discussion session. So if you are in Brooklyn, come out to Mega Everett's this Saturday, 2 p.m.
Thank you, Brother Nemo, for coming on the show today.
Thank
and
you,
yeah, please show up and show out at the event that he's talking about. That's going to be happening this Saturday at Mega Everett's, along, to support this initiative to get independent African-centered institutions together, to come together to think about how you can operate in a way much more beneficial mutual aid fashion, in an interdependent way, and get us to connect in ways that we haven't been connecting because of this colonial process that we're currently in and have been in for a couple hundred years now. But the fight continues, and we know that we're gonna win despite of ourselves. But with that said, we're gonna jump into a Black Power break and come back with some stories to end it out for today's show. So see you on the other side.
But you know that many young Negroes don't want anything that smacks of the American white middle class. But do they want something that smacks of whatever is the black middle class? Or do they just not want bourgeois values, which after all are the basis of this democracy?
Well, I think we have to see what they are saying. I would be the first to agree that integration does not mean giving up everything that has an Afro-American taint, so to speak, a background. I think there are certain unique things within any culture and certain cultural patterns that when you get to the process of amalgamation can really lift the whole culture. And it seems to me that integration at its best is the opportunity to participate in the beauty of diversity. I think the other thing that we've got to see is that these young people are saying that there must be a revolution of values in our country. As Jimmy Baldwin said on one occasion, what advantage is there in being integrated into a burning house? And I feel that there is a need for a revolution of values in America, because some of the values that presently exist are certainly out of line with the values and the idealistic structure that brought our nation into being. Unfortunately, we haven't been true to these ideals, and many of the values of so-called white middle-class society are values that need to be reviewed and re-evaluated, and in a real sense they need to be changed. So I think the young people in the Negro community who are raising these questions are raising some very profound questions about our total society. In other words, they are saying that there must be a restructuring of the architecture of our society where values are concerned. And with this I would agree with. So in the quest for integration, I think we can offer our whole nation something, because there are three evils in our nation. It's not only racism, but economic exploitation of poverty would be one, and then militarism. And I think in a sense, and in a very real sense, these three are tied inextricably together, and we aren't going to get rid of one without getting rid of the other.
Welcome back. You are tuned into the Rise Up Morning Show on Black Power Media Reloaded. And we forgot to say in the beginning to hit the like button, subscribe, notifications, do all of the stuff. And you're going to say, you ain't say nothing to Kimba.
I don't get paid to do that. All right.
Again, we're talking about
I'm just saying, I do not get paid to do that. It's not my job.
None of us
Now,
get
if I
paid
want
to
me to
do
do
any of
that,
this.
we
None of us
can
get
have a
paid to
meeting.
do any of this. This is the
And
point.
that's all of our jobs. Exactly.
That's beside the
Absolutely.
point. All right. That's beside.
Is it? Is it? It is all of our jobs. Definitely, people like, share, subscribe. I think that this particular episode is extremely poignant for those who are parents and caregivers of people who are being educated in white institutions. I do believe that it is incumbent upon us to know that we cannot continue to allow our children to be educated in this system of standard American education and expect that they will come out with any revolutionary thought or values or even independent thought, because all they are being taught is white studies.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, to King's point, when he's talking about the youth and, the way in which they're pushing against, because we know the standard education is a white middle class education. And so when King talks about them pushing against this white middle class positioning and value system, he's talking essentially too about them pushing back against this type of education system, that they receive in general. Now all of us have gone through this education system, and so we know, you could think to and see how it pushes toward white middle class values, taste, ideas, and all of those things, and the importance of us, if we want to not have, so if they push those away, then what do they have instead? We have to have something there for them. We have to have, if they're going to be dropping that, what is being forced upon them? What is it that they're picking up? What is it that we have for them as Black people, for them to embrace and take up? And so we need to be having education and institutions that are able to really provide an education that allows them to be able to be trained, as Nima was talking about, those, some of us come into our consciousness in college, but we know it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that you come to learn all these things when you're in college, and so that you must be trained up and we know that also it's the most important parts and the most important stage of education for Black people, and just for people in general, is when you're young. And so when we're talking about training them up, it's got to start at the very, very, very young level, when they're, even before they're in school, when they're 1, when they're 2, when they're 3, when they're newborns. Like, it's very, very important. And Amos Wilson even talks about this when he talks about the developmental psychology of Black children. And so understanding that and being able to offer that for ourselves, and seeing how, yes, we can create these things, but make sure that they're going to last, that they're not going to, fly by the night. They're not going to end once the person who started the organization or the institution ends, but that they're going to outlast those who created it, outlast those who participate in it. And that we can have those for generations. So yeah, I think it's definitely super important. And I think I wanted to say this in the before the we cut to break, but I said, let me just, I can add it, throw it in after, in terms of what your question was, Kiana, in terms of what can, homeschooling parents be able to do for their children in connection to independent African-centered institutions. And I have found that, through my own lived experience, but also through the research that I do, that there are homeschool and independent African-centered institution connections. So I remember I went to this one independent, as an example, and then I'll move on. Independent school that I went to, African-centered, and they had an advanced math class for their students, but then they had some homeschool students who would also zoom into that class at the same time. And so it's just knowing and finding and building the ways in which we're going to maintain these networks, because we're going to have different kinds. We're going to have people who are homeschooling. We're going to have people who have these independent institutions, and we're going to have people who are in the public schools. And we know that it's part of the process. Eventually we'll get out of having to have, all of these different ways in that kind of way. We know it'll still look, it'll still be dynamic. It won't be, obviously just one singular way. But in that process, how do we create those networks and use those resources to make sure that we're educating as many of our young youth as we can, and use resources wisely?
I definitely think that sometimes independent Black institutions miss out on the homeschool collective in their avoidance of helping to establish homeschool education co-ops. And I think that helping to establish homeschool co-ops is one of the best ways for independent Black institutions to be sustained, because at the end of the day, we recognize that if you are established as an educational institution, then you still have to answer to the government for something on some level. Yeah. And building homeschool co-ops is the way for us to get to our educational freedom and our interdependence that will free us of subsistence on the government, and also a certain level of accountability to them. And I do believe that many times the fact that we overlook that when we think about African-centered education is one of the things that's holding us back a bit. But if we leaned more into helping to establish those homeschool co-ops and making those homeschool co-ops a real thing, then we don't need to worry about being an institution. Because one of the things that we need to look at right now, especially these independent Black institutions, you know, the Trump administration is what it is for all the reasons that it is what it is. But one thing that we can count on right now is that we can get money for home education and for establishing quote unquote independent schools. Now, are they going to give that to an entity that establishes itself as an independent Black institution or an independent African-centered educational institution? Probably not, because of the quote unquote DEI flag. But also, if we think about it, homeschoolers can get these funds. Homeschool co-ops make sense right now as a way to make sure that we can sustain independent Black institutions. But I digress. That is just my soapbox that I'm always on as a homeschooler, because I don't like clique stuff. I don't like clique shit at all. I don't like it when Black people get to a point where they feel like they want to look down on other Black people because of your education or lack thereof, or my child goes to this school and you're still homeschooling, whatever. I'm an anti-intellectual to a degree, because I'm not a college educated person. And I don't believe that this is the only way for us to get our education. I don't knock it for people who choose to do that. However, I just know that the shit ain't for me. And quite possibly it might not be for some of our children, but for those who do choose, of course, we want them to be prepared. We want them to be able to make it, but we do want them to be able to be prepared in a safe environment that is African-centered. And I just think that it bears a bit more scrutiny right now when there is the opportunity for funding from this administration, and it's coming by way of homeschooling.
Key point, important point. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm definitely, I think it's important for us to continue to have more conversations about this, because I think one of the things too people are always saying, and I think this also speaks to Akimba's story that we're going to talk about next, is that when we're thinking about colonialism and imperialism, a lot of the times, we're talking about the issue and the problem and what's happening, but we also need to be talking about solutions, right? And so what we're doing today, and part of the discussion that we've been having since we got on, is solutions. How do we make a way, and how do we fight through this in terms of the solutions that we create? And so, Akimba, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this kind of connects to your story, no?
It all connects, man. It all connects. But no, this is an important story I wanted to bring out because it's sort of a success story in regards to a contradiction being overturned, but at the same time, it also raises the issue of colonial capitalism, that contradiction, because these issues, this one in particular, we're talking about river blindness. This is something that could easily be solved. We have the resources to be able to address this issue. Ben had the resources, but it often gets overlooked because of the populations that are impacted by it. So just to go through this story, Niger's historic triumph over river blindness is a beacon of hope for Africa. And the first for the continent, Niger was certified by the WHO for eliminating onchocerciasis as a public health problem. In a small village in Niger, Tahuna region, an 80-year-old man sits in the shade, his eyes clouded by irreversible blindness. His wife in her 70s sits nearby, her body covered in scars beneath her clothes. They're among the last people in Niger who Dr. Salisu Adamu treated for river blindness, a cruel illness that robs people of their sight, health, and dignity. Some 70% of people in their community once suffered from river blindness, just one of 21 neglected tropical diseases that together affect over 1 billion people worldwide. It wreaked havoc on local schools and farms, plunging families into poverty. Many of their neighbors fled in search of respite, both from illness and fear. Less than a generation later, the picture is remarkably brighter. That's thanks in large part to Dr. Salisu, who coordinates Niger's National River Blindness Program with support from the Onchocerciasis Elimination Committee, a global network of NGOs and disease experts, along with pharmaceutical companies and donors. Last week, in a first for Africa, Niger was certified by the World Health Organization for eliminating river blindness as a public health problem, meaning that no child born in Niger today will fear being permanently blinded by this preventable disease. So I'm not going to read through this whole story. It's very touching. You might even want to drop a tear, right? But again, like, this is definitely a success story in the sense that now children can be born in Niger, and the concern of that child being affected by river blindness has essentially been eliminated. But again, you still have over 1 billion people who are who could potentially be victims or are suffering. I'm sorry, in the article it says that are suffering from river blindness. Now, again, I wanted to raise this story because, yes, it's a success story, but it also points out the contradiction, because when you're dealing with these neglected tropical diseases, and even in his name, neglected, it's neglected because the resources from wealthy communities that can easily invest in solutions to these problems, they're being allocated for other health issues. So these are not like these are put at the bottom of problems that need to be solved, even though it wouldn't cost them much. I think they said it's 50 cents for the medicine to be able to remedy this problem. It only costs 50 cents, I think, a person. Right? It's very cheap to come up with the remedy for this issue. But again, it goes back to just like profit incentives. It goes back to what we talked about last time I was on here, as far as cost benefit analysis, where it costs too much for some of these wealthy. At least they look at it, in regards to they feel like it will cost too much for them to invest in this, and they can divert that money to issues that are happening in those wealthy countries where they reside. Again, I think this is something for us to like really point out in regards to why the system itself, this international system, needs to be overturned, because it puts money over people. It puts profit over people. That profit motivation keeps the masses, the majority of the world, subjected to things that can easily be resolved if it wasn't for people looking out for their individual interests. So yeah, I don't know. That's really all I had on there. Again, great. I'm happy that this is happening, but it's a solution that could have been resolved. And there's still billions of people who are subjected to this is one of many neglected, tropical diseases. Just to be clear, this is one that was solved. But African people and other colonized people are subjected to a variety of these diseases.
Yeah, and I think to your point of it being just one, and also putting forth what's priority, what's not, or like what's able to be done and what's not able to be done, that we have to do these things all at one time. Like it can't be that, okay, yeah, because we're looking at this, we're gonna because we're trying to fight in this one area, we're gonna neglect another. And I think also another trick of colonialism is the propaganda of what people should be doing, right? What people should be using their skills and talents for. In terms of telling you like, oh, you know, what you should be doing is aspiring to be a celebrity, aspiring to be someone who's got tons of money, as opposed to being, you know, really looking and seeing what your skills are, what you're called to do, and using that in your community to help create solutions for things that can easily, like we were, like, you know, was saying, like that, not, and I don't know if the word is easily, but that, you know, can be corrected and can be addressed, you know, at a different level, or I guess maybe at a different, I don't want to make it seem like it's such an, like everything's such an easy problem to fix, but like clearly from the way that they're wording it, it's something that, you know, is not out of this world. You know, this is not thinking about going to Mars. You know what I'm saying?
No, it's like these capitalists, they're looking at how much money I can make off of it, right? And then the medications may be too expensive for those marginalized communities to be able to buy. So you deal with like those conscious just across the board when you're dealing with these neglected tropical diseases. So it could be, you know, okay, we have the solution to the problem, but they can't afford these medicines. So, you know, we're not going to, and then the short-term profit or I should say like the short-term gain is not worth it. You know, it may take a while for them to even see some profit. And it's like, okay, are we willing to take a loss to see some profit later on? And when it comes to African people, do they want to operate in the red just for the sake of solving some problems of the colonized?
I also
and the answer is no.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, that we know that when we think about some of the problems that they present very expensive solutions to, that there are inexpensive solutions to those problems that have been created when people are put in positions where they are empowered to see themselves as people who have the knowledge and ability to create something that doesn't already exist. So when we think about even when people are talking about how to get cleaner water and how to clean, you know, contaminated water, or we've seen it with energy when people are thinking about how do we create and harness energy to power different things, and every creation or every innovation around solving issues and problems that we're facing isn't always put forth. Like sometimes, you know, you'll read an article or you'll see it online where someone created this thing and it was very inexpensive, but they're not getting coverage, that they're not being put out there. They're not getting, you know, the funding, or whoever is funding research or whoever's funding the creation of different mechanisms or pharmaceutical drugs or non-pharmaceutical drugs aren't always put forward. We know that even when we're thinking about the ways that we even treat diseases, that it's very much a capitalistic model that pushes you toward pharmaceutical drugs, as opposed to teaching you how to use what is grown around you, or even knowing what medicinal plants are, or, you know, how to do homeopathic remedies, and also the importance of being proactive. You know, how can you save off something or prevent something by being proactive as well? Like most of those types of solutions aren't always put forward. The ones that are put forward are the ones that are going to be shiny and expensive, and you know, ones that will generate more profit than they will stop the problem. Because if you really stop a problem, then you can't really continue to generate profit off of it. But if you allow the problem to persist by making a solution that is expensive, then you're going to make sure that the problem persists and that you're also going to be profiting off of the problem persisting. And we know that the solutions that don't do that are not always highlighted or even supported or put forward. And so I guess that's one of the things I'm thinking about in terms of, you know, the way that they've solved this problem, and also the ways that we can solve other similar problems as you're raising it for this story. I don't know if anybody else had anything to say before we close out.
I think you said it all. No, I do want to, because I didn't have a chance to before we went to the news break, because I mean that's more important right now, getting that out there than, you know, personal opinions and, you know, analysis and stuff like that. But I wanted to give a shout out to our guest, Nemo, which is for me was kind of it was like a I told y'all moment. I'm classified as the crazy one around here by, you know, Kalanji. You know, I won't say you guys, but I will say, you know, Kalanji said it a couple times. But I know he means it in good spirit. I know it's nothing negative. And to see someone who, one, is 2 years younger than me, but is still an African man, being able to articulate, you know, some of the things that I have been alluding on this network. It was a breath of fresh air. I can tell you that, because I know that I've been knowing that I'm not the only one from my age, from my generation, that thinks this way, and that is sick and tired of, you know, us, you know, masquerading around and being performative when it comes to, you know, creating what is called institutions. But I'm gonna take what he said. They're proto institutions, which that was a dope definition. And he said a whole lot that I think, you know, people really need to, if you haven't, you know, or if you're going to go and watch this back, watch that particular moment, because there's a time period where he talks about these organizations that we see out here, whether it's from the African diaspora, and I'm specifically speaking to those that know that they have valid critiques within their organization, and they do not do a damn thing about it. They let it sit there, they let it fester, and then they try and, you know, say that they're in solidarity with everything, but yet you can't come to a consensus of not a party line, but essentially a human line, you know, which is you treat people with humanity. And it goes back to what Reverend Keanu was talking about. Sorry, in regards to you know, how organizations should work. You know, the organization should, if they're from the jump telling you not to ask for funding, or that there isn't funding in the budget, but yet you see people, you know, going to these events, you know, flying and, you know, whatever it may be. Okay. And you know that they could give you $100 stipend or a $200 stipend for you to go and get some groceries, even though that might not even under this climate, you know, cover basic needs from the grocery store. If they can't do that for you, but they can sure as hell, you know, say that we need to allocate funds to getting, you know, to paying someone to be at an event, rather than them just coming up and showing in solidarity with the organization. Again, the working together, the interconnectedness, the lack of internationalism, all of this is prevalent. And they masquerade like there's internationalism, you know, because the organizations are, you know, funded by tech muggles. They're funded by rich oligarchs. They're funded by, you know, performative Marxists. And so, you know, we have to be very clear. And he made a very, very good, very, very good analysis of the situation. And so I just want to say thank you to our guest. Thank you to Natasha, to Ikemba, for making that happen. Because it was a breath of fresh air, and I get to say I told y'all.
Well, thank you all for tuning up to the Rise Up Morning Show.
Kiana had to go. I just want to say, for those that are probably wondering, but you will see us all together, hopefully, if not tomorrow, you will see us next week, or if some news breaks, you know, and we all, you know, muster up the energy to come on live, then, you know, you'll see us. But Yeah.
You want to see me tomorrow, man?
Shoot. Yeah, you gonna come on? You can come on. You got the time?
I might make it happen.
Well,
always feels good to be wanted.
Shoot.
With that said, we want to see all of y'all when we see you the next time. So make sure you tune
Until
in
next time.
every morning, okay? 7 to 9. We'll catch y'all on the other side.
Sure.
Rise up.
Rise up.
Sometimes the riot is a quiet one, where the battle is to love yourself and function in society, where voices of reason are muted by anxiety, like gaining notoriety is selling your soul. So we tend to go no deeper than the shallow water level, trying to keep us overhead in the face of all the slurs and the stares. Mentally frozen, paralyzed by fear of failure and success. So we lock, stock, barrel, running while it's crumbling. All these towers and they're babbling, but the baby's in the bath and the stash under the bed on my head, spinning from the circles and the puppets and the strings that they pull. Then we move. Reactionary warfare never produces winners on the field. Feeble and foolish, what tools and what weapons are we using? We need some new ones. Real revolution, it's real solutions. What we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my enemy. Real revolution, where my inner me really a mirror for the galaxy. New time, brand new paradigms, new contracts to sign. They thought that this would all be televised, though it's happening right before our very eyes. It's on the inside, with their guns cocked. When that rock drops, standing on the rooftop, praying that the mountaintop can live inside the valley. People tell me the reward is somewhere off in heaven, like heaven's only in the sky. A chariot's a swinging, like God is something separate from yourself, from your wealth, from your lover, from your neighbor. Oh, your savior is coming in your own name, coming with the face the same. Real revolution, it's real solutions. Where we've taken on the ways of the ones who conquer with their guns and religion and division. Got my inner me looking like my enemy. Real revolution, where my enemy is really a mirror for the galaxy.